In any good story, we find ourselves relating to characters or situations without even realizing it. If I ask you who your favorite character is in The Lord of the Rings, whoever you wind up choosing probably says something about you. Now, if we look a little closer at why we might identify with one character or another, we should consider the tension or struggle that the character is dealing with. In storytelling, typical archetypes for conflict are man versus nature, man versus society. These conflicts shape the story, and we often bond with certain characters because we can relate to that struggle in our own lives. Now, when we are world building in the TTRPG space, how do we set up for these powerful conflicts and have relatable characters emerge? Let's start with what we know. Take any story that you love, any one, and define the two sides that underlie the plot. Now, this will often and frustratingly be good versus evil, but let's see. Lord of the Rings? Check. Star Wars? Check. Harry Potter? Check. Mean Girls? Check. Now, think about the two sides in each of these and ask yourself, how obvious was it for you, the viewer, to know which side was the good guys? In Lord of the Rings, we needed no help here. Not many of us sat at home quietly identifying with Saruman's recently birthed army of Uruk-hai thinking, yeah, I'm down with that. With Star Wars, it may have seemed obvious that we were all supposed to side with, the rebellion, but we all know that there's a lot of you out there who would sell your souls to get your hands on a TIE fighter. What I mean is the distinction is still clear, but in good stories there will always be a complexity that makes us ask if our moral compass is even working. A fantastic example of this is Game of Thrones. It's often really hard to get a handle on if anyone is actually truly bad.
I am the king!
Okay, some are really bad. But, in the Game of Thrones scenario, the complexity over sides or alignments or loyalties is not clear-cut. And that makes for some really fantastic tension, in the story. So just when Jaime is looking like the worst cunt that ever lived, the winds shift a little and make us wonder. The High Sparrow was, an incredibly unlikable guy, even if he was giving Cersei a spanking she really deserved. The best way to humanize someone in a story is to show their inner conflict. We empathize with that, and that empathy draws us closer. I think some of the more powerful characters and their struggles in stories come from when their inner struggle causes them to be less identifiable on the good to evil spectrum. I think that this is because, we all struggle with what it means to be good or bad sometimes. And for this, characters like Darth Vader or Severus Snape or Gollum or Jaime Lannister or Walter White or Thomas Shelby or Katie Heron, their inner conflict causes them to also be somewhere within a gradient of good and evil. And that layers the character's complexity and connects them to our own struggles. Now, characters we tend to despise in a story are ones whose drive lacks conflict or obstacles. Take Joffrey or Ramsay Bolton, two of the worst villains in storytelling history, in my opinion. The sides of their conflict or struggle both tend towards evil, so it's harder for us to identify with the struggle, and that makes it hard for us to relate to our own conflicts. When we really want to see a villain die, or frankly, when we jump up and cheer when they do, it's likely because that character is the source of the struggle of someone that we do identify with, and we enjoy seeing that obstacle removed. That's victory. Now, I would make the argument that these underlying tensions within a story, be they about politics, family dynamics, border disputes, resources, what have you, they add complexity to your framework, and that creates anchor points for your characters to build their allegiances and backstories from. So the point is, you need to create an underlying tension within your framework. Perhaps the city your framework sits in has 3 families all vying for control. Perhaps the planet your whole world exists in has a magical source that slowly destroys natural resources, creating some looming crisis. Or perhaps your world has multiple systems of government, and within that, they're all opposed to one another for reasons of religion or belief. This conflict should have a pervasive presence amongst those that populate your world. So what that means is NPCs that your party might encounter will not only be aware of the conflicts or sides, but they'll have opinions and often make convincing arguments towards their own beliefs. These encounters with your PCs will create tension and make space for good dialogue and debate. They'll spawn adventures and quests and so on. And if your party has taken a side in the conflict, this could make dealing with certain NPCs or factions more difficult or friendly. It also opens up an ease of roleplay for your players as they grow to align with their own identifiable side of the conflict and thus play out their character from that viewpoint. Besides, find me a real-world situation of interest that does not have some underlying conflict at the heart of it. Conflict is where things get interesting. Now, one more thing. When the winds do shift and something happens that forces a player in your group to reconsider everything they've built their character from, it can be cathartic, it can be heartbreaking, emotional, empowering, and most of all, it's going to offer new interesting tacks to roleplay from. It breathes life into decision-making. All right, before we go any further, I want to remind you to please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And more important than that is if you have questions about this topic or other world-building situations, ask me in the comments. Also, again, as many of you know, I'm only interested in earnest, constructive help here. Good growth and learning comes from good analysis and critique, but it should support the effort. Don't tear down your future world builders, because you don't think their question is deep enough for you. Being constructive could cause them to flourish and maybe be your next GM. So be nice. All right, let's get back to it. All right, if this seems hard for you in your world building, start here. Your world has two dominant religions, and these religions have two opposing creation myths. Perhaps one has a singular omnipotent god, and the other has a pantheon of gods, each in control of some aspect of mankind. Sound familiar? Now, create cities and towns within your world that solely follow one belief or the other. There can also be larger, more diverse locations that have a mix. Then create a mission or charge on the part of one of these two religions that its own message is the truth, and that everyone who does not accept that truth is damned. Still sound familiar? Now everything in your world can connect to one of these two systems, and the tension is created. So try that first. All right, so another example that may be a little more complex could be, in a smaller setting, a necromancer with a complex backstory resurrects scores of people that wish for longer lives. These resurrected people are identifiable because of a faint whitish glow in their pupils. Now let's say we call them the faceted. They are mostly good, but there is a stigma that exists amongst the more conservative members of society that they are unholy, and there is a great bias against them. The faceted have a hard time being discriminated against and occasionally act out, thus enhancing the stigma. The population's opinions on the faceted people are a division between worship and fear. Now, just that minimal framework offers conflict and tension, a great base from which to build lore in your world, and a host of adventures and quests that could connect to it. All right, one last thing to wrap up. Remember in my earlier videos, I talk about story building as a collaborative framework. It's better to have an outline than a full-blown story. Think of this conflict as a prologue of sorts to the underlying framework of your world. It's cemented in place when your adventure begins. But it can change, and it can evolve, especially in the unexpected ways that your players will introduce. And that is where the magic happens. Okay, number one, thanks for watching Dungeon Master Academy. Get out there and world build, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.